All the chiefs gave their approval with bows and nods. The compliment pleased them. Human nature is the same, whether enshrined in a red breast or a white one. The only one who looked sullen was the black dog. He saw clearly that the chiefs were all against him, and his heart swelled with rage at the sight of his adversary's triumph. The white vulture continued speaking. The black dog claims that the Crow Nation's women will mourn and sing the death song for the young braves that the white vulture led to their graves. But the black dog is lying, and the chief's accusation was uttered with powerful force. The women in the Crow lodges by the big mountain will mourn for the braves slaughtered by the black dog for the sake of the white woman. The black dog's face turned purple with passion. Speaking in a hoarse voice full of fury, he drew his sharp scalping knife from his belt and addressed the white vulture. If the great fighting man of the Crow Nation isn't afraid, he'll follow the black dog. And with a majestic step, the warrior, knife in hand, strode toward the thicket where the crow killer was hidden. The white vulture understood the challenge to mortal combat and drew his knife, following the black dog. The rest of the chiefs remained seated in the circle, waiting to see the outcome. The black dog headed straight for the spot where the crow killer lay. "Jerusalem," muttered the crow killer as the warriors approached his hiding place. "If they keep coming, they'll finish me off. I'll take out that coward first and save the white vulture the trouble." Drawing his knife, the scout waited, but the black dog suddenly turned and went into the thicket not far from where the scout was hiding. The white vulture followed behind. 30 feet from where the crow killer lay was a tiny open space that wasn't overgrown with bushes, and it was to this spot that the black dog led the white vulture. The crow killer, concealed in his hiding place, had an unobstructed view of the spectacle merely by diverting his gaze. "Show," he muttered. "It will be as amusing as a circus, but if the white vulture does not vanquish that chap, I am not an authority on combat." He then cast an eager glance towards the sight. The two chieftains took stock of each other for a moment, their lengthy, razor-sharp blades glinting in their hands. Thereafter, the black dog took a step towards the white vulture and commenced the attack. For an instant they teetered back and forth like boxers, their gleaming eyes scanning for an opening in their opponent's defense. Then, without warning, the black dog lunged fiercely at the white vulture's chest. The chieftain skillfully evaded the thrust by nimbly jerking backwards, and before the black dog could regain his composure, with a quick downward motion, he sliced across the black dog's visage, creating a ghastly wound from his forehead to his chin, from which torrents of blood flowed. Enraged by the pain and blinded by the blood seeping into his eyes, the black dog attempted to pounce on his agile adversary as if to subdue him with his weight. Nevertheless, as quick as a cat, the white vulture nimbly eluded the assault by sidestepping, and then, as the black dog passed by him in his furious charge, he impaled him, leaving a gruesome wound in his side. The black dog collapsed on his knees, his blood pouring out of the two injuries, his vitality dissipating swiftly. The wound in his side was mortal. Twice he tried to stand but fell back on his knees both times. The white vulture stood a short distance away, his arms folded, calmly observing him with a smirk. For the third time the black dog sought to stand, his eyes still shooting daggers at his rival. With Herculean exertion, the chieftain arose and stood upright, but after a mere moment his strength ebbed, and the knife tumbled from his lifeless hand, and he collapsed dead. For several moments the white vulture, who had not sustained even a single wound, appraised his foe who perished by his hand. Serenely he gazed at him, then proceeded to approach, retrieving the lifeless Indian and carrying him to the riverside, where he consigned him to the waters. Then he meticulously scrubbed off the bloodstains resulting from handling the corpse from his hands and chest, cleaned his knife, and returned to the encampment. "He's like a bolt of lightning!" exclaimed Albert. His eyes remained glued to the unfolding scene. The white vulture strode confidently into the circle of chiefs, taking his former place amongst them. Each of them cast an earnest gaze his way, but there was no trace of the violent conflict he had just endured. "Brothers, hear me," he spoke with a commanding tone as he resumed his seat. "The Great Spirit is furious with the Black Dog for causing the death of so many young braves at the hands of the White Wagon braves. Black Dog has been carried away by the swift waters, and the Crow Nation shall never lay eyes on him again. I, the White Vulture, shall take the pale-faced squaw of Black Dog, and in return I shall give my brothers my share of the fur wagons. Is it pleasing to you?" The chiefs silently nodded in agreement, well aware that it was not wise to cross the will of their formidable leader. Observing from his hiding spot, the scout was struck with a sudden realization. "I reckon he provoked the quarrel with Black Dog just to get his hands on that white squaw. That's why he got rid of him. He's a wily Indian," the guide muttered to himself. "The white squaw has to be Miss Daisy, 'cause there ain't no other woman gone missing. I'm afraid that the Black Dog won't be the only man he'll eliminate before he can claim the white squaw. But where is she? I can't catch a glimpse of her anywhere. She must be in the timber." Thus the Crow Killer observed the Indians closely, eagerly searching for any signs of their plan. Chapter 10. Old Albert. The Crow chiefs had a swift and decisive council, and it was decided that the attack on the wagon train was futile. They returned to their homes, convinced that the odds were not in their favor against the pale-faces. There was no mention of the fate of Black Dog, and all believed the story of White Vulture, that he had fallen into the river. The warriors were dispatched to prepare for their march back home. Suddenly, 2 mounted Indians arrived with the body of a young brave who was slain on his post, without raising an alarm. The warriors examined the body in amazement, wondering how a foe could slay one of their own without being detected. The old chief, Thundercloud, meticulously examined the body and found only one wound, a single knife thrust through the heart, a blow that could only have been delivered by a powerful and practiced arm. The old chief suspected that the Crow Killer was responsible for the young brave's death. He had seen firsthand the devastating effects of the Indian fighter's arm, and he was correct in his assumption. The Crow Killer watched the Red Braves leave from his hiding place and sighed with relief as they rode westward. However, he wondered about the whereabouts of Daisy, whom the chiefs had taken captive. "Hope you enjoyed the story." He stood still and surveyed the glade, his eyes searching for any sign of the little girl. "But I'm sartain that she's in their hands," he muttered to himself. The last of the Red Chiefs had disappeared from the little glade, and Albert knew that he had to act fast. He needed to get back to the wagons as soon as possible, send Dave on with the train to Montana, and then trail the Red Devils to try and sneak the little girl out of their clutches. "That will be no easy matter, I'm afeard," he said, his voice low and raspy. "But there's nothing like trying. I've been wanting to go to the Crow Nation for a long time. Now hi's a chance. First, to rescue the little gal. Second, to find out about my Injun wife. The sooner I'm off for camp, the better." As he retraced his steps carefully through the timber, Albert's mind was racing. He knew that the next few days would be crucial. His plan was risky, but if it worked, he would be able to save Daisy, and perhaps even find out more about his past. When Albert reached the glade where he had slain the Crow warrior, he paused for a moment at the edge of the timber. "'Pears to me that the other side of this little opening in the timber would be just the place for Dave to ambush himself," he muttered. He gave a short, quick bark like a coyote, and in a second the bark was repeated on the other side of the glade from the thicket. Fearlessly, Albert stepped from the timber into the open space, and as he did so, Dave, rifle in hand, stepped from among the bushes on the opposite side of the glade. "Are the Indians near?" Dave asked anxiously as he met Albert in the center of the little opening and wrung him warmly by the hand. "Nary Injun," Albert replied. "They've taken the back track and gone off, bag and baggage, for the mountains." "And Daisy?" Dave questioned, his voice trembling slightly. "I hain't seen her," Albert said, his eyes scanning the glade once more. "But we'll find her, Dave. We'll find her." The disappointment etched on Dave's rugged features was a sight to behold, but the seasoned guide wasted no time in comforting him. "Don't fret, man. While I haven't seen her, I've heard about her," he said. "You have?" Dave cried, eyes lighting up. "I have indeed, but it isn't much of a silver lining for you, I'm afraid. The crows have taken her, and they're heading for the mountains." Then the crow killer recounted everything he had seen from his hiding place. When he finished, Dave fell silent, lost in thought. "Albert, what should I do?" he finally asked. "Well, if you want my honest opinion," the crow killer said, "this is the situation. The crows are carrying the girl to their lodges in the Crow Nation, probably to the village of the Thundercloud. When they reach there, they'll celebrate their capture of the fur wagons, and then they'll likely marry the girl off to the White Vulture. That's what I reckon, anyway. But if we follow them with a small party, we might be able to rescue Daisy," Dave interjected eagerly. "Not likely, my friend," the crow killer replied, shaking his head gravely. "The Indians number 60 or 70, and they won't waste any time getting back to their home. If we followed them and caught up, the chances are 10 to 1 that we'd all be wiped out. And Dave," he added, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, "don't forget the wagon train. We've given our word to guide and protect it all the way to Montana. You know as well as I do that a man's word is his bond, and we can't go back on it now. It's a tough pill to swallow, I know. You care for that girl, and it's hard to leave her at the mercy of those red devils. But there are women and children in that train, and we've committed to see them through to Montana." The young man cried out in agony, his heart aching at the thought of his beloved Daisy in the hands of merciless people. "I know we made a promise, but I cannot bear the thought of Daisy being taken away by those ruthless red demons. Please, Albert, there must be a way for me to at least try to save her." "Don't despair, my dear Davy," said the crow killer, speaking with genuine sympathy for the young hunter. "I have a plan, and I believe it will help us. 2 days' travel to the north will lead us to Fort Benton, where we can find guides to assist us. Here is what we will do. I will speak to the emigrants and explain our situation. I am confident they will let me go. I know the country like the back of my hand. Years ago I had been to the Thundercloud village before. I will follow the crows, and you carry on with the train to Fort Benton. You can then get the guides you need and travel down the Missouri River. The Indian village is about 100 miles from the fort, nestled between the Missouri and the mountains. The forested area is perfect for scouting. You will need 4 days to reach the village. When you are near, follow the river and hide your horse in the timber. Keep moving on foot, and I will be on the lookout for you. Do you understand?" "I do," Davy said, shaking the old hunter's hand. "I will join you on the Missouri. Together we will save Daisy from those devils." "Indeed," said the crow killer. "The crows have superior numbers and strength in their own territory, but with strategy we can succeed in our mission." To the men on the train, Albert explained his plan to rescue Daisy from the clutches of the crows. The emigrants readily agreed to his departure, as each man there, with the exception of Patrick Allen, was willing to risk his own life to save the captive girl. And so, the wagon train continued its journey towards Golden, Montana. With a firm handshake, Albert and Dave bid farewell to each other. Dave would continue on with the train, while Albert, mounted on his trusted roan mare, headed westward on the trail of the crows. "I reckon I don't need to hurry myself much," muttered the crow killer, as he observed the spot where the Indians had camped, holding his steed. He watched as the white-topped wagons disappeared in the distance over the rolling prairie. Finally, the last wagon was out of sight, leaving Albert alone on the vast prairie. "The Injuns are headed for the village of the Thundercloud for sure," he thought to himself, "and I could find my way there even in the darkest of nights, so I'll ride on at an easy pace and not worry myself. It's about a 2-day journey if the crows travel fast, which I believe they will, so me and my horse will take it slow." And so the hunter set off leisurely, the trail leading him along the bank of the Yellowstone for the first 5 miles before the river turned south. The trail parted from the river and led westward across the prairie. As the sun started to set, the hunter found a suitable grove of trees, allowing his horse to graze on the fresh young prairie grass. He made do with some sun-dried beef and hard crackers from his saddlebags before settling in for the night. After surveying his surroundings, he drifted off to sleep. At the crack of dawn the next day, the crow killer awoke, ate another frugal meal, and mounted his horse to continue his ride on the trail. The savages had not even bothered to disguise their tracks, confident in their numbers and the unlikelihood of being followed. The old hunter had little difficulty tracking them down, for the trail was clearly visible. On the second day's evening, the old guide decided to halt for the night, thinking that he was within 10 miles of the Indian camp. He dismounted and settled himself for the evening. After a good night's rest, the old guide continued on his journey again, and by the third morning, he found himself in the saddle once more. The appearance of the terrain had drastically changed, indicating that he had reached the base of the Rocky Mountains. On the east bank of the river stood a vast prairie that extended all the way to the junction of the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers. This area was commonly referred to as the Valley of the Yellowstone, and it was without a doubt as fertile a spot of land as the sun had ever shone upon. The guide, known as the Crow Killer, crossed the river and made his way around the Indian village. He did so in such a way as to approach it from the north, since Dave would come up the bank of the river from the same direction. If the guide remained south of the Indian village, then they would never be able to meet. The Crow Killer succeeded in his mission, and was easily able to tell the position of the village. The smoke that rose from the settlement provided a clear indication of its location, and the guide was able to proceed with caution. After carefully hiding his horse in a thicket by the river's bank, the guide continued on foot. The country was rough and uneven, which was excellent for scouting. As the Crow Killer had said, the village lay in a little hollow, close to the Missouri River, surrounded on all sides, except the one washed by the river, by hills that were heavily timbered. The scout had gotten within a mile of the village and could identify its position through the smoke that rose from it. He was proceeding cautiously through a little glade between two rocky hills when he suddenly heard a noise in the shrubbery right before him. Before he could turn back, a huge grizzly bear emerged from the thicket, heading straight for the scout. Albert knew that he couldn't use his rifle, since the report would alert the Indians. He had no other option but to flee, because a man stood very little chance of surviving in a close encounter with the brown monarch of the Rocky Mountains. A stroke of luck was upon Albert, as a sturdy oak tree loomed ahead of him. He instinctively dropped his rifle and leaped towards the tree, scrambling up its lower branches as fast as he could. To his dismay, the grizzly bear he had been tracking for hours had followed him to the tree and looked up with a curious gaze. Worse yet, another grizzly appeared from the surrounding thicket, even larger than the first. "I'm in a real bind now," Albert thought to himself. "I'd rather fight the Indians any day than these wild beasts. This is a mighty fine mess I've gotten myself into." Both grizzlies looked up at the man, licking their jaws hungrily, evidently waiting for him to make a move that would give them the opportunity to pounce. The only saving grace for Albert was the small size of the oak tree, meaning only one bear at a time could climb it, unlike the black bear's brother, the grizzly, which was known to be a skilled tree climber. Albert scrutinized the bears closely, studying their behavior as he knew their habits well. They were obviously hungry, and soon enough they would try to climb up the tree to get to their prey. But how could he fend them off? Remembering how sensitive a bear's nose was, he formulated a plan. Quickly drawing his sharp knife, Albert raised it high and selected a sturdy branch to be used as a club. He trimmed the branch of its extraneous appendages, creating a hefty weapon. The hunter waited patiently for the imminent attack. As the grizzly slowly made his way up the tree, Hugging the trunk tightly with his thick, powerful paws, Albert braced himself, clutching his newly formed weapon. Just as the vicious beast came within range, the hunter landed a heavy blow to the bear's snout with his wooden club, a move which elicited a horrid, reverberating howl of pain from the mountain king and set him retreating back down to the earth. The grizzly regained himself and attempted another ascent up the tree, only to suffer another agonizing blow that sent him rapidly down below, where he rolled about on the ground and rubbed his nose furiously with his giant paws. The constant assault with his club had been too much for the beast, and he consented defeat, retreating back into the forest. Albert breathed a sigh of relief. It had been a close call, but at least he had come away victorious from the unexpected confrontation. The hunter let out a booming laugh of satisfaction as he watched the two bears retreat in defeat. The second bear, puzzled by its companion's loss, took its turn scaling the tree. Yet, to its dismay, it was met with the same fate as the first. Both bears huddled together, rubbing their snouts, mulling over their unexpected failure. After a moment's hesitation and some curious glances at the triumphant hunter, they shrugged it off and trotted back to the thicket where they came from, conceding the territory to the crow killer. Albert, meanwhile, had to stifle an instinctive urge to yell out a victorious cry as the defeated bears left the vicinity. He knew better than to draw any unwanted attention from the nearby Indians. Waiting until he was certain that the coast was clear, he carefully descended from the tree, retrieved his rifle, and resumed his journey towards the Crow village. Chapter 11. Attack on the Crows. 3 days had passed since the daring arrival of the Crow killer at the Indian village deep in the heart of the wilderness. On the second day, Dave, overcome with worry and fear for his beloved Daisy, rode non-stop from Fort Benton to join forces with the scout. Together, the two intrepid men had taken up positions in a dense thicket high up on a hill that overlooked the bustling village by 1/2 mile. From their vantage point, they could carefully observe the happenings in the Indian town. With close observation, the crow killer quickly realized that Daisy was being held captive in one of the lodges in the northern section of the village, set apart from the others. This was evident due to the strict watch kept around it, and the fact that only one chief, the White Vulture, ever visited this particular lodge. The Indians had celebrated their successful ambush of the fur wagons in their typical way, with much merrymaking and carousing. However, it was clear that along with the furs, the savages had also come into possession of some dangerous firewater. The result was that half of the braves were drunk and disorderly, with several violent confrontations having already taken place. Despite their otherwise proud and fearsome nature, it was now necessary for the White Vulture and the other elder chiefs to step in and keep the peace before a larger conflict broke out. As the third day drew to a close, Dave implored the crow killer for a plan of action. With his characteristic calm and steely resolve, the scout assured his companion that they would not merely attempt to rescue Daisy, but they would succeed. The crow killer had noticed a pattern in the behavior of the White Vulture. The chief would invariably take a walk past the lodge, where Daisy was being held at dusk, before disappearing into the nearby woods. Seizing on this information, the scout devised a plan of action. They would leave their current position and stealthily make their way down to the thicket in the vicinity of the lone lodge. On the arrival of the White Vulture, the two men would pounce on him, restraining him quickly and quietly to prevent any outcry. They would then strip the chief of his clothes, with Dave donning them, as he already bore a strong resemblance to the White Vulture. With a little red paint from one of the Indian warriors' pouches, they would effectively make Dave indistinguishable from the chief. The crow killer would don the chief's blanket to hide his own identity, with a few finishing touches to his makeover. Together, they would boldly walk right into the camp, undetected. The fate of Daisy rested on their success. "You'll enter the hut first," I whispered, "and I will follow. The guards will mistake you for the White Vulture and won't say a word. When the guards leave with him inside the lodge, we take the girl and run for our horses. The crows won't suspect anything for an hour or two, and by then we'll be gone down the Missouri like lightning. What do you think?" "Excellent," exclaimed Dave. "Don't be too sure. Luck plays a big part in these things," I warned. We slunk out of hiding, taking a circuitous route to reach the timber on the north of the village. A narrow path leading from an open glade in the village into the thicket caught our attention. "Here's where he comes," I said, pointing to the trail. "He's bound to come alone sooner or later." We hid ourselves inside the thicket, waiting for our prey. The hunter fashioned a gag from a piece of wood and some flannel, while I cut a long strip from my hunting shirt to bind it in the man's mouth. As the sun set over the Indian village, we heard the sound of approaching footsteps. The white vulture emerged from the hut, walking right into our trap. We pounced on him, gagging him with the wooden ball, and made off with the girl towards our horses. The crows wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late. Luck was on our side that night as we galloped off down the Missouri, the stolen girl safe in our arms. He made his way through the dense forest, his steps careful not to make too much noise. Suddenly, like a panther in the night, the crow killer pounced on him. He was taken by surprise and found himself on the ground with the strong hand of his attacker around his throat, silencing him. Despite the attack, the white vulture did not cry out for help and instead struggled against his opponent. But it was no use. The crow killer was too strong, and after a brief struggle, the white vulture lay still. The guides wasted no time and stripped him of his fur-trimmed hunting shirt and leggings, gagging him and restraining his arms and legs tightly with their belts. Surprisingly, the warrior did not fight back and submitted to their treatment. The crow killer wrapped himself in the chief's blanket, while Dave, dressed in the white vulture's clothes, stained their faces with red paint from the Indian's pouch. Dave then put on the white vulture's headdress and became a perfect likeness of the crow chief. With slow and steady steps, Dave and the crow killer made their way to the isolated lodge. Mistaken for the white vulture, Dave was ignored by the guards and soon entered the little lodge, followed by the crow killer. In the dim light of the fire, Dave saw a figure reclining on a couch made of bearskins. The red-gold locks that hung over her shoulders gave away her true identity. The woman raised her head upon hearing their approach and shrank away in fear at the sight of the painted face of the white vulture.